Capcom seemed to be on a bit of a streak, with the massively successful Resident Evil 7 followed up by the excellent Resident Evil 2 remake. Things were looking up for Resident Evil 3. However, I feel that Capcom might have taken this game out of the oven a bit too early for their own good. This is our review of Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil 3 is a game with non-stop action and a breakneck pace. However, I think that ultimately led to its detriment. Let me be clear. I don't think Resident Evil 3 is a bad game, I just think it has a lot of shortcomings. Obviously, the graphics in this game are beautiful. Capcom's proprietary RE engine is absolutely stunning. Lighting and textures feel vibrant and lifelike, while animations look and feel natural. Character models all look fantastic as well. Jill and Carlos's updated models capture their spirit of the 1999 counterparts, but take full advantage of a modern update. It's obvious a lot of time and care went into the creation of these particular characters. The same can be said for the rest of the cast of characters, including, of course, Nemesis. On top of this, Capcom's environmental design is top-notch. City streets, disgusting sewers, and dark dingy buildings only support the scenario of a total viral outbreak, but they contribute to the environmental storytelling as well. There are some small nitpicks I have, such as Jill reloading 6 rounds in the grenade launcher even when I have less than that in my inventory. Other than that, the presentation is stunning, and I hope Capcom continues to use the RE engine to improve on what will be all future Resident Evil titles. The story and characters are great. It's a huge step forward when considering the original. The dialogue is fluent and natural as well as pretty badass, especially for Jill. There's really nothing more thrilling than blowing up a Hunter Gamma in the sewers and hearing Jill drop an F-bomb. I'm a total Jill simp. For the sake of spoilers, I'm going to skip the finer details, but basically the story takes place a few hours before and a few hours after the events of RE2. Jill and Carlos are working together not only to escape the city, but to expose the truth to the world about Umbrella's experiments. Even though brief, it's a story that feels tight and carries a small theme about corporate greed, even if it feels a bit forced. Something of note is the controversial choice Capcom made not to bring back real-time decision-making. Although the lack of this system makes for a more streamlined narrative with a more cohesive plot overall, I think this certainly hurts the game's replayability. One of my favorite aspects of the original game was going back and trying out different combinations of choices to see what narrative I would end up with. The original structure also lent itself to several different endings. This aspect of the classic is now lost, and while I think the new narrative is good and filled with plenty of high-stakes action, it would have been nice to see the old system make a return. The gameplay on display here is overall good, but I'm not sure of some of the decisions that Capcom made in regards to the controls. Just like the 1998 classic, the dodge mechanic is clunky and a bit difficult to get a hand on. Even after multiple attempts to dodge enemies, it seems I can only get the dodge or the perfect dodge down a handful of times. I'm not sure if this is due to the implementation of the mechanic or poor design overall. Thankfully, they changed this in the sections with Carlos with a more effective shoulder check followed by a powerful punch. It definitely comes in handy in those sticky situations when you need something real quick just to give yourself some breathing room. Other mechanics that seem to be missing are defense-based, such as shoving a grenade or a knife into a zombie to get out of an attack. It seems like a huge oversight for a sequel of a game that implemented that mechanic so well. Combat overall is good as well. I've never had any issue aiming straight for the head of a zombie and landing a few headshots. A welcome addition to the combat is the introduction of generators and explosive barrels. These environmental elements add a new level of street clearing of enemies and stunning the ever-pursuing Nemesis. Other than these points, gameplay and combat is essentially the same from RE2. An argument could be made that if Capcom's desire was to turn up the action, perhaps they should have changed up the mechanics a bit more to be a little bit more dialed in for the action. But this isn't something that breaks the game. Capcom also made a bold choice to turn down the puzzle solving in general. As a series staple and a remake of a game with some really memorable puzzles, I really think they missed the mark here. I don't mind some of the puzzles to break up the monotony of shooting and running that this game puts forward. It's not something I'm hung up on, but I definitely think it's worth noting here. It also seems that the gore was turned down in this game, and it's very noticeable. Coming off the back of RE2, heads were exploding, limbs were flying, and dynamic physics were used to simulate enemy death. However, it would seem Capcom scaled these animations back in an effort to give the engine a break so it could focus more heavily on the larger environments and the amount of enemies on screen. Like I said, not a big thing to be hung up on, but certainly worth mentioning. Oh, and for all you longtime fans, yes, there are still boxes to break and collectibles galore. One of my biggest issues with RE3 is the length. After my first run through, I came in at a total playtime of 5 hours and 28 minutes. I know this is subjective, but I believe that any full-price $60 single-player game in 2020 should have at least 12 to 15 hours of gameplay. Don't get me wrong, This doesn't make RE3 mechanics or storytelling any less spectacular. I just wish there was more of it. In addition to this, the lack of conventional New Game Plus doesn't help either. In place of this, Capcom has offered a store to utilize in-game currency to buy special weapons for your new game. My only issue with this is how are the points calculated? How do I know how many points I am or am not getting per playthrough? And where does it matter most to maximize my efforts to get points? All of these unanswered questions make for an uninspired second playthrough. As a huge fan of the original, another thing I take issue with is the glaring omissions of the central set pieces from the 1998 classic. I'm a total res head, and killing the undead will always have a special place in my heart. But I just feel that some things that made this game memorable are missing entirely. That's not to say that the new additions aren't great on their own, but as a longtime fan, I was expecting to see some stuff they didn't even hint towards, which honestly might have only disappointed me further. There are some changes that I do feel are a fresh take on things. However, overall, I felt that the old game did these moments better, especially one involving a cameo from the last game and the fate of a fan favorite character. Another big omission is the Mercenaries mode. This classic RE mode lent itself to hours of gameplay. However, it would seem that Capcom replaced it with Resistance, which in its current state is rough, to say the least. One thing that really gets under my skin is the lack of a proper New Game Plus mode. I'm sorry, I just don't feel a shop that you can spend in-game currency on for new upgrades in a new campaign is the way to go. I feel like this is something Capcom could have just as easily added in addition to New Game Plus mode, kind of like Resident Evil 4. One last thing that I find to be a bit of a disappointment is the integration of Nemesis. In the opening hours of the game, he's classic Nemesis, chasing you around, emulating Mr. X in a more intense and intimidating way. Just like the original, doing battle with him nets you drops of gear upgrades. Unfortunately, this doesn't last long either. While I do enjoy the scripted sequences following the open hours, I feel like the charm is worn off. Unlike Mr. X in RE2, Nemesis isn't always stalking you. After Downtown Raccoon City, he actually becomes a more neutered version of the character. While these scripted sequences are fun and I do enjoy them for what they are, I have to admit they're a bit of a letdown when in the 1998 original, we had much more omnipresent and lingering menace to deal with. Ultimately, I feel Mr. X in RE2 is more intimidating and more dynamic of the two, and it's a shame they couldn't figure out a way to implement a more menacing Nemesis. Like I said before, Resident Evil 3 isn't a bad game, but it does have a lot of setbacks. For every aspect I found to be disappointing, there are two that are equally as great. Although brief, returning to Raccoon City was still an enjoyable experience. I have to stress that this game will be an absolute blast for Resident Evil fans. Casual gamers really need not apply unless they find it on sale and want to see what all the fuss is about. However, I would urge those players to first check out the excellent Resident Evil 2 remake first before deciding if they want to check out this one, because it's objectively the more well-rounded experience. If you like this review, please subscribe, give us a like, and share this video with your friends. For all things Resident Evil and nerdy alike, stick with the Nerdy Basement over on our website. Stay nerdy, friends.